In the year is 1775. Across the eastern coast of North America, 13 British colonies lie stretched from the cold frontiers of New England to the warm plantations of Georgia. For generations, these colonies lived under British rule, growing, trading, expanding, and evolving into a unique society. They were British in culture, British in law, and British in identity. But beneath the surface, the colonies had also become something different, a people who were beginning to think of themselves not just as subjects of a king, but as citizens of a land with its own destiny. Before we proceed, can you please hit the like button and subscribe to this channel to enjoy premium gist about histories. The story of the American Revolutionary War does not begin on a battlefield. It begins in the decades before the first musket was fired, in a time when colonists and the British Empire saw their relationship shifting in ways neither fully understood. For much of the early 1700s, Britain governed the colonies lightly. This era was often described as salutary neglect, meaning the colonies enjoyed a wide degree of independence while still benefiting from belonging to a vast empire. They elected local assemblies. They built prosperous towns. They developed economies based on farming, trade, shipbuilding, and resource extraction. And they fought in wars alongside Britain, most notably the French and Indian War from 1754 to 1763. This war reshaped everything. Britain defeated France and gained control of huge territories in North America. But victory came with a cost: massive war debts. To pay them, Britain looked to the colonies. Parliament passed new laws intended to raise revenue: the Stamp Act, the Tea Act, the Townshend Acts, and others. These taxes affected daily life: paper, licenses, newspapers, tea, glass, and paint. To the British government, these were reasonable measures for colonies they had defended. But to the colonists, something felt deeply wrong. The colonists argued that British subjects had a fundamental right: no taxation without representation. They believed only their own elected assemblies had the authority to tax them. Parliament disagreed. It insisted it had full authority over the empire. The colonies saw these taxes as a violation of their rights, and resentment spread rapidly. Across the colonies, protests grew. In Boston, groups like the Sons of Liberty led demonstrations and organized boycotts of British goods. Merchants refused to import British products. Ordinary people took to the streets. Pamphlets circulated, speeches were delivered, and the idea that something larger was happening began to take shape. Then came a moment that transformed resistance into open defiance. On the night of December 16, 1773, colonists disguised as Mohawk warriors boarded ships in Boston Harbor and dumped hundreds of chests of British tea into the water. This symbolic act, later known as the Boston Tea Party, was the boldest rejection of British authority yet. The British government reacted harshly with a set of laws the colonists called the Intolerable Acts. They closed Boston Harbor. They placed Massachusetts under direct royal control. They allowed British troops to be quartered in private homes. These measures were meant to punish and isolate Massachusetts, but they produced the opposite effect. Colonies from New Hampshire to Georgia united in sympathy. In 1774, colonial leaders gathered in Philadelphia for the First Continental Congress. It was a remarkable moment. Representatives from 13 distinct colonies sat together, debating a unified response. They called for an end to British imports and urged the king to restore colonial rights. But their appeals went unanswered. In early 1775, British authorities prepared to enforce their rule by force if necessary. Tensions rose as colonial militias trained more frequently, storing arms and ammunition in secret locations. One of these stores was in Concord, Massachusetts. British General Thomas Gage ordered troops to seize it. On the night of April 18, 1775, British soldiers marched toward Concord. But riders, including Paul Revere, William Dawes, and Samuel Prescott, spread the alarm across the countryside. Church bells rang, lanterns were lit, and militia units known as the Minutemen assembled in the dark. Just after dawn on April 19, British troops reached Lexington Green. A small group of militia stood before them. Both sides were tense. In the confusion, a single shot was fired, no one knew from where. What followed was brief and chaotic. The British fired a volley, the militia dispersed, and 8 colonists were left dead. Minutes later, the war for American independence had begun. At Concord, American militia engaged the British again, forcing them to retreat. As they marched back toward Boston, colonists fired from behind stone walls, trees, and fences. By the time the Redcoats reached the city, they had suffered significant losses. The colonies now saw that resistance was possible. In the weeks that followed, thousands of militia encircled Boston. The Second Continental Congress convened in Philadelphia. They appointed George Washington, a respected Virginian planter and military veteran, as commander-in-chief of the newly formed Continental Army. Washington brought dignity, experience, and a calm resolve to the Revolution. Though the colonies had no navy, little money, and poorly armed troops, they now had a leader capable of uniting them. In June 1775, colonial forces fought the British at Bunker Hill near Boston. Though the British ultimately took the hill, they paid a heavy price. The battle showed that untrained colonists could stand against one of the most powerful armies in the world. Word spread across the colonies, strengthening resolve. Despite rising violence, many colonists still hoped for reconciliation. In July 1775, Congress sent the Olive Branch Petition to King George III, declaring loyalty while asking for peaceful resolution. The king refused to read it. Instead, he declared the colonies in open rebellion. The hope of peaceful compromise faded. Meanwhile, a pamphlet appeared that transformed public opinion. In early 1776, Thomas Paine published Common Sense, a powerful argument for independence. Paine wrote boldly, directly, and emotionally. He called monarchy an outdated system and argued that America had the right, and the duty, to break free. His words reached farmers, workers, merchants, and ordinary citizens. Independence, once a radical idea, now felt inevitable. By the summer of 1776, Congress agreed. A committee was formed to draft a declaration explaining why the colonies sought independence. Thomas Jefferson, at only 33 years old, became the principal writer. He spoke of natural rights, equality, and the legitimacy of overthrowing oppressive government. On July 4, 1776, the Declaration of Independence was adopted. Though the signing took place over several weeks, the date became symbolic, the birth of a new nation. But declaring independence was one thing. Securing it was another. The war would now intensify and become far more dangerous. In late 1776, Britain launched a massive invasion of New York City. British forces under General William Howe, supported by German Hessian soldiers, overwhelmed the Continental Army. Washington suffered defeat after defeat. His troops retreated across New Jersey, exhausted and demoralized. Many feared the revolution was collapsing. But Washington refused to give up. On Christmas night, 1776, he led his army across the icy Delaware River in a daring surprise attack on Trenton. In the early hours of December 26, the Continental Army struck Hessian forces, capturing the town. Days later, Washington won another victory at Princeton. These successes revived American morale and proved that the Continental Army could still fight. The war dragged into 1777 and 1778, with both sides struggling for momentum. The British aimed to split the colonies by capturing the Hudson River Valley. General John Burgoyne led an army south from Canada but became trapped near Saratoga, New York. In October 1777, he surrendered his entire army to American forces led by Horatio Gates and Benedict Arnold. Saratoga became a turning point. It proved the Americans could defeat a major British force. More importantly, it convinced France to enter the war. France saw an opportunity to weaken Britain, its old rival, and recognized the United States as an independent nation. In 1778, France signed a formal alliance with America, providing troops, money, supplies, and, most crucial of all, a navy. The entry of France transformed the conflict into a global war. Britain now had to defend its empire in Europe, the Caribbean, Africa, and India. The American struggle became part of a much larger contest for world power. Despite this shift, the Continental Army still faced severe challenges. In the winter of 1777 to 1778, Washington's army camped at Valley Forge, Pennsylvania. It was one of the darkest periods of the war. Soldiers lacked shoes, coats, blankets, and food. Disease spread. But a Prussian officer named Baron von Steuben arrived and trained the army with new discipline and professionalism. By spring, the Continental Army emerged stronger and more organized. In 1778 and 1779, the war stretched on through raids, skirmishes, and battles across the colonies. In the West, frontier fighting between settlers and Native American tribes accelerated, often influenced by alliances with Britain or America. At sea, American privateers raided British ships, while John Paul Jones led daring naval attacks, famously declaring, "I have not yet begun to fight." The British shifted their strategy to the southern colonies in 1780, believing Loyalist support would help them regain control. They captured Savannah and Charleston, achieving major victories. But the southern campaign became brutal and unpredictable. American forces led by Nathanael Greene, Daniel Morgan, and local militia used hit-and-run tactics to wear down British troops. Guerrilla fighters like Francis Marion, known as the Swamp Fox, harassed British supply lines and troops. Though the British won battles, they could not pacify the countryside. Their forces thinned, morale dropped, and they found themselves stretched across hostile territory. Broken heart. By 1781, British General Charles Cornwallis moved his army to Yorktown, Virginia, hoping for reinforcement by sea. But events were turning against him. The French Navy under Admiral de Grasse sailed to the Chesapeake Bay, blocking British ships from reaching Cornwallis. At the same time, Washington made a bold move. Instead of attacking New York, he marched his army hundreds of miles south to Virginia, joining French forces under General Rochambeau. At Yorktown, American and French troops surrounded Cornwallis. For weeks, they bombarded the British position, tightening the siege. Trapped, outnumbered, and with no hope of rescue, Cornwallis surrendered on October 19, 1781. Yorktown was not the final battle of the war, but it ended major fighting. Word spread quickly. British morale collapsed. Back in London, Parliament voted to end offensive operations in America. Peace negotiations began soon after. In 1783, the Treaty of Paris was signed. Britain formally recognized the independence of the United States. The new nation's boundaries stretched from the Atlantic Ocean to the Mississippi River. After 8 years of war, tens of thousands of lives lost, and hardships suffered by soldiers and civilians alike, the United States of America had secured its place in history. The American Revolutionary War was more than a military conflict It was a struggle over ideas and identity. It forced ordinary people, farmers, merchants, sailors, enslaved Africans, Native Americans, women, and children, to confront questions about freedom, loyalty, and the meaning of government. Different groups experienced the war differently. For enslaved people, some fought for the British in exchange for promises of freedom, while others fought for the Americans hoping that liberty would one day extend to all. Native American nations struggled to protect their lands and sovereignty, often finding themselves caught between colonial and imperial ambitions. Loyalists who supported Britain faced persecution and, in many cases, exile. Yet from this complicated and often painful struggle emerged a new political experiment. The revolution inspired ideas about democracy, human rights, and self-governance that influenced movements around the world. The Declaration of Independence, with its powerful language about equality and unalienable rights, became a symbol for future generations seeking justice and freedom. In the years after the war, the United States faced enormous challenges, establishing a government, unifying diverse states, dealing with financial crises, and confronting unresolved questions about slavery and territorial expansion. But the foundation laid by the Revolution provided a framework for growth and adaptation. Today, the story of the American Revolutionary War remains a powerful reminder of how ordinary people can rise to extraordinary heights when driven by conviction. It shows the complexities of war, the cost of freedom, and the determination of a society seeking to shape its own destiny. The struggle from Lexington and Concord to Yorktown was not easy, quick, or perfect, but it changed the world. The legacy of the American Revolution continues to echo through history, influencing nations, inspiring reformers, and reminding us of the enduring power of ideas. It is a story of courage and sacrifice, of vision and conflict, of hope and hardship. It is the story of how a group of colonies, against overwhelming odds, forged a new nation, one built on the belief that people have the right to govern themselves.